She had served the crown for more than 60 years. She had stood beside the Queen at the funeral of Prince Philip, the most private grief of Elizabeth's life. She was Prince William's own godmother. And then, in the space of a single conversation at a palace reception, all of it came undone. Her name is Lady Susan Hussey. In November 2022, at an event held inside Buckingham Palace, she said something to a guest that would force her resignation within 24 hours, draw a public rebuke from the future king, and pull the royal family into one of its most uncomfortable controversies in years. And because the event that night was hosted by Queen Camilla, it left behind a question that some online have since blown wildly out of proportion. So let's deal with that head-on, because accuracy matters more than a dramatic headline. You may have seen claims that Camilla was somehow caught targeting William's godmother, or that royal leaders have secretly agreed to cut Camilla's ties to the crown. Neither of those things is true, and there's no credible evidence for either. What is true is more subtle, and in many ways more interesting. A scandal happened on Camilla's watch. The future king responded in a way that spoke volumes, and royal commentators have been openly debating what Camilla's place will be once William becomes king. Those are the real threads of this story, and they're worth pulling apart carefully. So who exactly is Lady Susan Hussey, and why did her fall send a tremor through the whole institution? To understand the weight of what happened, you first have to understand that Lady Susan Hussey was no minor figure. She was, for decades, one of the most quietly powerful people inside the royal household. Lady Susan Catharine Hussey, Baroness Hussey of North Bradley, was born on the 1st of May, 1939. She joined the royal household in 1960 and went on to serve Queen Elizabeth II as a woman of the bedchamber, one of the most senior and trusted ladies-in-waiting, for more than 60 years. That is not a number you hear often in any institution. 6 decades of continuous, discreet service at the very center of the monarchy. Over that time, she became something close to the household's institutional memory. According to royal correspondence, one of her roles was helping newcomers adjust to the strange and demanding world of royal life, including, reportedly, the young Diana, Princess of Wales. She was a close companion to the late Queen, spending time with the family at Balmoral, and she was among the most highly decorated members of the household, made a Dame Commander of the Royal Victorian Order in 2013 after holding a lower grade of that honor since 1971. But the detail that says the most is this. When Prince Philip died in April 2021, and the Queen sat alone at his funeral in the depths of the COVID restrictions, the woman chosen to accompany her in the car was Lady Susan Hussey, not a politician, not a foreign dignitary, a trusted friend of more than half a century, and she was also godmother to the Queen's eldest grandson in the direct line, Prince William, who grew up seeing her at his grandmother's side. When King Charles came to the throne, Hussey stayed on in an honorary role within his household. She had, in other words, served 3 reigns and become woven into the fabric of the institution itself, which is exactly why what happened next landed so hard. Now we come to the night everything changed. On the 29th of November 2022, Buckingham Palace hosted a reception as part of the global campaign against violence against women and girls, tied to the annual 16 Days of Activism. The event was hosted by Camilla, then Queen Consort. It was her cause, her guest list, her space. Lady Hussey was there in her supporting role within the household. Among the guests was Ngozi Fulani, the founder of Sista Space, a London-based charity that provides specialist domestic abuse services to women of African and Caribbean heritage. By Fulani's own account, published the following day, the trouble began within about 10 minutes of her arrival. She said a member of staff approached her, moved her hair aside to see her name badge, and then began questioning her about where she was from. Fulani, who is black and was born in Britain, explained that she was British. According to the account she shared publicly, the questioning continued regardless. She was asked where her people came from, and when she said she was British, She was pressed again and again. Fulani later told the BBC that the exchange felt like an interrogation and described it as a form of abuse, even though no physical violence occurred. She said being invited to an event and then made to feel unwelcome in her own country had caused real distress. Crucially, this wasn't only Fulani's word. Other guests backed her up. Mandu Reid, leader of the Women's Equality Party, who witnessed part of the conversation, told the BBC the questions had been offensive, racist, and unwelcoming. Nazir Afzal, a former chief prosecutor, said he too had been asked about his heritage that evening. When Fulani posted the exchange online, it spread across the world within hours. Buckingham Palace moved quickly. In a statement, the palace said it took the incident extremely seriously, that it had investigated immediately, and that, in its words, unacceptable and deeply regrettable comments had been made. Lady Susan Hussey resigned from her honorary role the very next day, the 30th of November. And here is where the question about Camilla genuinely belongs, stripped of the exaggeration. This was Camilla's event, her household, her cause, her guests. So it was fair for commentators to ask what responsibility the host carried for an incident that happened under her roof, involving one of her own attending aides. That is a legitimate question about accountability and oversight. It is a very different thing from claiming Camilla orchestrated or targeted anyone, which no evidence supports. For her part, Camilla issued no personal statement. The palace press office handled the response on behalf of the institution. What made the moment even more charged was who chose to speak and when. Prince William was thousands of miles away when the story broke, in Boston with the Princess of Wales for the Earthshot Prize, his first major trip to the United States in years. It was meant to be his moment on the world stage. Instead, the headlines back home were about his godmother and a charge of racism inside the palace. And William did something striking. Through a spokesperson on the 30th of November, he issued a short, deliberate statement. Racism, it said, has no place in our society. 5 words that, in the context, carried enormous weight. This was not a vague comment from a distant royal. This was the future king. Speaking about an incident involving the woman who had been his own godmother since birth, choosing clarity over family loyalty in public. Royal commentators read it as a significant signal. Christopher Anderson, a royal author, told us weekly at the time that the palace was scrambling to do damage control and that the timing could not have been worse, with William and Kate abroad. The incident, he noted, involved someone who operated at the heart of the royal household, not on its margins. There has also been commentary from authors including Omid Scobie that William's willingness to step out and speak independently has at times created friction between Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace, 2 households with their own staff, their own instincts, and their own ideas about how the monarchy should modernize. It's worth being clear that this is one commentator's interpretation rather than confirmed fact, but the broader point is hard to dispute. By speaking when he did, William was asserting his own voice and his own values, publicly and on his own terms, even when the subject touched his own family. The institution noticed. Then came the part of the story that most people forgot once the outrage cycle moved on, and it may be the most revealing part of all. On the 16th of December, 2022, Lady Susan Hussey and Ngozi Fulani met in person at Buckingham Palace. According to the palace, Hussey offered her sincere apologies for the comments that were made and the distress they caused. The meeting, the palace said, was filled with warmth and understanding, and Fulani accepted the apology, with both sides expressing a hope that their example might point toward resolution through kindness and cooperation. Hussey also pledged to deepen her understanding of the issues involved. Fulani, it should be said, later spoke about the lasting toll the episode took on her and on her charity, and felt the palace could have done more to support her in the aftermath. But within the institution, something quiet and significant happened. By early 2023, Lady Susan Hussey had returned to royal duties, reportedly representing Princess Anne at a memorial service. Just months after the controversy that forced her to step aside, she was back, discreetly and with evident approval from within the family. That reinstatement sent its own message. The institution had not cast her out for good. The woman who had served 3 monarchs and accompanied the Queen at her husband's funeral was, after a genuine apology and reconciliation, welcomed back into the fold. There is even a layer of irony here that deepens the picture. Lady Hussey's daughter, Catherine, serves as one of Queen Camilla's own companions, which means the family at the center of this episode remains closely entwined with Camilla's household to this day. The relationships inside the palace are far more tangled than any simple story of villains and victims allows. So if Camilla wasn't secretly cutting anyone's ties to the crown, where does the genuine speculation about her future actually come from? This is where we have to separate documented fact from forecast. Here is a real, structural change that Camilla did make. After Queen Elizabeth's death, she chose to retire the centuries-old role of lady-in-waiting, the very kind of position Lady Hussey had held, and replaced it with a smaller, more informal circle she called the Queen's companions. Some royal historians have called this one of the more notable changes to the shape of the household in modern memory. Supporters see it as a sensible modernization. Critics have framed it as Camilla putting her own stamp on the palace and moving on from the old guard. Both readings are interpretations, and reasonable people land on different sides. The bigger question that commentators keep returning to is what happens to Camilla when William eventually becomes king, and on this the facts are clearer than the rumors suggest. When King Charles's reign ends and William ascends the throne, the Princess of Wales, Catherine, will become queen alongside him. Camilla, as the widow of a former king, would no longer be a serving queen consort. By long-standing convention, she would most likely be styled Queen Dowager. She would not become Queen Mother because that title applies to the mother of the new monarch, and Camilla is William's stepmother, not his mother. The last royal to hold the Queen Dowager title in that strict sense was Queen Adelaide, back in the 1830s. What that change means in practice is the heart of the matter. The Queen Dowager title preserves Camilla's status and dignity, but it carries no active institutional power. Camilla currently serves as patron or president of more than 90 charities. According to royal reporting, the continuation of those roles, and indeed much of her public position, would ultimately rest at William's discretion as king. Some of those duties could be passed to Queen Catherine. Some commentators have even suggested Camilla might choose to step back from public life altogether, retreating to her private home, which would fit her long-known preference for a quieter existence. And this is where William's own feelings become relevant, though they must be handled honestly, because the picture is genuinely mixed. The royal author Christopher Anderson has claimed that William and Camilla are not close, and that, in his words, Camilla has always seemed a little wary of William. Several biographers have suggested William never fully reconciled himself to Camilla's role in the breakdown of his parents' marriage, memories formed in childhood that don't easily fade. The royal expert Joe Little has observed that once William is king, he will be the monarchy's principal decision-maker, and every aspect of the family's public life will reflect his priorities. But it would be dishonest to present only that side. Other royal watchers argue the opposite, that the relationship between William and Camilla has actually warmed over the years, tested and strengthened by shared hardships, from navigating Prince Harry's departure to the experience of supporting their spouses through cancer diagnoses in 2024. They were seen attending engagements together with what observers described as relaxed, friendly body language. The truth is that nobody outside that family knows the real temperature of the relationship, and anyone claiming certainty is guessing. So let us be precise, because precision is what this story actually deserves. There is no royal council that has voted to erase Camilla. There is no secret decree. What there is instead is something quieter and more ordinary in the long history of the monarchy. When a reign ends, power shifts automatically and completely to the next sovereign. The roles, the titles, the prominence of those around the previous monarch are all reassessed by the new one. That is not a conspiracy. It is simply how succession works, and it has worked that way for centuries. Lady Susan Hussey's story and Camilla's future are connected, but not in the dramatic way the rumors suggest. They are connected because both remind us of a basic truth about this institution. Loyalty and proximity to power are everything inside a palace, and both are constantly being rebalanced. Hussey, after 60 years of service, was undone in a moment, apologized, reconciled, and was quietly brought back, because her decades of loyalty still counted for something with the family she had served. Camilla, for all the speculation, will keep her title and her dignity, while the active power she holds today will pass, in time, to William and Catherine, exactly as the system is designed to ensure. The British monarchy rarely changes through dramatic announcements. It changes the way a tide changes, slowly, quietly, and almost invisibly, until one day you look up and the shoreline is somewhere new. The Hussey scandal was a sharp, painful moment that revealed how quickly a reputation can fall and how a future king chooses to use his voice. The question of Camilla's place is not a plot against her, but the ordinary, inevitable arithmetic of who comes next. And when that transition finally comes, it won't arrive with a press conference declaring that anyone has been cast out. It will simply happen, the way these things always do, with a door closing softly rather than slamming. If this look behind the headlines changed how you see the story, share your thoughts below and consider subscribing, because the way power really moves inside the palace is a story that is still being written.